Hi, Charles White, president at IAM. IAM members have been really dealing with difficulties in global shipping, the supply chain issues, and port congestion. We wanted to take a moment to be able to really dig deep into this issue, to be able to determine what were the roots of these problems, how did we get to this point, and to be able to then look at it regionally as well and find out what are the different regions in our membership and how are they dealing with these problems. So IAM wants to be able to give you some potential avenues to solve some of these problems. We want you to know what we are doing to try to solve your problems and to be able to then come together to discuss solutions as well. So what I want to do is turn this first over to Mr. Ray Da Silva with Mobility Exchange, who's a strategic partner for IAM, to give us a kind of a timeline of where and how we got to the point that we're facing now. And so Ray, over to you.
In early 2020, as the COVID-19 virus was just starting to emerge, the Chinese government responded by shutting down factories in an effort to contain what was then a local crisis. Ensuing lockdowns in the following months, as the crisis loomed larger, started to change consumer spending patterns, temporarily reducing demand for imports. Shipping companies reacted to the sudden shift by immediately cutting capacity and idling some of their vessels. By the second half of 2020, Chinese factories had not only reopened, but had gone into overdrive to meet the tremendous demand fueled by the pandemic. Consumers forced to shelter in place during the lockdown and consequently deprived of normal activities like eating out in restaurants, traveling, attending public gatherings and live entertainment events, then shifted their spending to exercise equipment, games, kitchen equipment, and a host of other consumer goods, most of which were imported from Asia, China in particular. Unlike previous economic downturns and recovery periods which played out over years, this one whipsawed the shipping industry in the space of a few months, creating unprecedented and unexpected reactions affecting every part of our transportation infrastructure. One might view the statistics which show global trade dipping by only 1% in 2020 over the previous year and conclude that the effects were not severe, but plotted on a graph, the roller coaster effect of a 12% drop in April and May, followed by a similar and sharp reversal in the next few months, paints a different picture. The shipping industry just simply could not adapt to such swings that brought about shipping container imbalances and a rapid rise in freight rates, unprecedented and unheard of until then. Importers that were paying $2,500 for a 40-foot container from Asia to California are suddenly facing costs north of $7,000. Even at those prices, customers are sometimes facing 90-day backlogs to book space on sailings. Contributing to this perfect storm scenario were the ports, which provide vital infrastructure to move containers between the ships and their customers as they began to experience congestion issues due to the pandemic's effect on labor availability. A vast fleet of ships are anchored at some U.S. West Coast ports, waiting for berth assignments to unload and reload. Containers are frequently taking weeks to be delivered to customers, a reality that then further exacerbates the shortage situation by tying up containers and related equipment like container chassis to indefinite periods. These delays are causing frustration and unexpected costs to all consumers, including international moving consumers. Supply and demand pressures are causing another unexpected problem for U.S. agricultural exporters who cannot book export containers to Asia. Shipping lines are refusing these shipments because they could make several times the profit by returning the containers empty rather than full to Asian ports. No one can predict how this supply chain crisis ends. Perhaps some semblance of normalcy may resume with the help of vaccinations and other advances, but that may be just in time for the Christmas shipping peaks. In the near term, the crisis is impacting most every aspect of the international economy, especially in the small niche of the shipping industry related to international moving services. The plight of corporate transferees may not make the news, but that in no way diminishes the very real problems that they are facing.
Thanks, Ray. Really appreciate that. Great snapshot into how we've gotten to the situation that we're in today. The next thing we'd like to do is transition over to Mr. Brian Limperopoulos. He's the vice president at the International Association of Movers and has really been the subject matter expert on all of these issues. So right now, let's turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Chuck, for that introduction. This has been an issue that we've been working for several months, and we've been working collaboratively with our strategic partner, Ray DeSilva at Mobility Exchange, which just gave you an excellent overview of the situation about what's driving this issue from a very large perspective. And now for this next section, we are going to call on our worldwide network of experts and see what's going on in their regions. Like Chuck said, we have 2,000 members around the world, more than 170 countries. So we're just going to hear from a few of them about what they're seeing in their region and perhaps some of the steps that they're taking to help mitigate this crisis from their perspective. And at the end, what I do want to share with you is a little bit of an advocacy perspective about what IAM is doing through our advocacy on Capitol Hill to help alleviate this situation for our members and their clients. So without further ado, I'd like to go to one of our members in China. Jason Will with the Asian Tigers Group is the country manager in China. And Jason is going to give us that perspective from China and help us understand what they're seeing. Jason?
Thanks for letting me join this discussion on supply chains and the challenges that we have. Yes, well, China's been the epicenter of this supply chain perfect storm, as you would call it. So we've definitely been experiencing some challenges here. The United Kingdom in particular has been a challenging destination. One case, we had to wait 1 month before we could get space on a vessel. At one stage, to get containers to the US, we had to ship them to the Netherlands, get them transshipped, put on another vessel to get them to the US. But of course, that adds a lot of time onto the transit time. Meanwhile, we have families in the US experiencing the US winter, running out of clothes. So as a moving company, this places us in a very unenviable position. So if we have, for example, 3 container slots on a ship and we have 5 containers, how do we decide which containers get left behind? Do we give priority to the families? Do we give priority to the VIPs? In relocation, there are many critical timing elements. Hand over the lease or the apartment, temporary accommodation, flights, school arrangements, and of course, a lot of this critical timing is based on the shipment of the personal effects. So if the shipment of the personal effects timing becomes unpredictable, it unravels the whole relocation planning. Fortunately, most corporate accounts have been very understanding with the increase in shipping rates. However, we do have assignees that are most affected, the ones that are on a fixed monetary allowance for their relocation. So of course, what was affordable movement of personal effects previously, all of a sudden becomes unaffordable. And I'm not aware of many cases where this fixed allowance has been adjusted in light of this increased shipping cost.
Okay, thank you, Jason. We appreciate your perspective coming from China. Now we're going to whip around to the United Kingdom, where we're going to hear from Tony Tickner with the Eurogroup. Tony will give us an update on what they're seeing from the United Kingdom, as well as give us a quick update on Brexit. Tony, take it away.
I've heard mooted a number of times that Brexit has also added to this problem. Brexit hasn't caused any problems in the shipping world with regards to shipping. What we have seen with the Brexit effect is we've seen increased costs in the supply chain. And this is due to the fact that we all have new customs procedures to go through. This has caused a major increase in administration and operational costs. So again, the supply chain all the way down the line on this is being effective. This on top of the normal shipping prices within our industry escalate, phenomenally. How do we deal with all this? I think the key that we have to do, and we have to be very, very aware, is we have to manage customers' expectations with regard to the increased costs. We as an industry and as individual companies must manage our customers' expectations far, far better. And a way of doing this is have the customer not just take our word for it, but use what is published out there. Use our industry associations publications. Use our press publications. The shipping increases, the Brexit problems are well publicized worldwide.
Thank you, Tony, for that update. We appreciate your feedback on what's going on in the United Kingdom. And now we're gonna throw it over to your fellow countryman, Phil Wells, who's based here in the Washington, D.C. area, where I'm located. Phil, give us your perspective from JK Moving Services. Let us know what you're seeing on that front.
As far as the US goes, East Coast, we haven't had too many issues. I think in the Baltimore, Washington, Norfolk area, haven't seen a lot of shipments that have been bumped. What's been a little frustrating for us is when shipments have been bumped, they wouldn't let us return the container back to Baltimore. They wouldn't before a certain date, and then we'd get hit with chassis charges. And so right there, you're looking at extra expenses. We've just done actually a fairly big RFP for shipments that had door-to-door lanes with the Far East and the US. And a lot of agents in those parts of the world were actually reluctant to even quote us ocean freight rates because of the volatility of the rates. One example out of Thailand, they told me a 20-foot went from $3,000 to $10,000. And even at that rate, you're not guaranteed that it's going to get on a vessel. So we're seeing shipments being bumped, not once, but twice, even 3 times. So again, you can imagine what that would do to someone's planning as far as moving to a country and their short-term accommodation. Well, hopefully your relationship with the account is strong enough to explain that this rate is only good for possibly only 30 days. And a lot of times you're kind of even winging it a little just because you're not getting a rate out of someone. So that's an issue. I think the US government is the one area where there's a lot of risk because I know you're familiar with the whole TMSS system where you're populating rates twice a year. One thing we've come to realize, you need to do a very good job of documenting the rate you got at the time of submitting that quote, because you're going to need that quote as sort of proof rather than paying $3,000, why you're paying $10,000 more if you stand any hope of an account sort of giving you a break there. I think there's been enough in the press for them to sort of realize that this is a genuine issue, and they have been fairly understanding. And even on the door-to-door rates that we've been locked into, a couple of accounts actually suggested that we move to a pass-through basis, perhaps in those instances. Well, setting expectation is always a big part of a successful move, right? I think prepping them for the possibilities of what might be happening. If there are certain things in that sea shipment that you think you're going to need when you get to the other end, and this shipment is going to take a lot longer than expected, whether it might be the kids' winter clothes or their toys or things you might need for work, your uniforms or something like that. Yeah, my advice would be to maybe give a larger air allowance, and the whole air situation too is another conversation in itself with the pricing there and the availability too. But definitely setting that expectation of what we might be facing, particularly from certain parts of the world. I think you mentioned earlier, I mean, none of us really know when this is going to turn around the situation. And if it's just, temporary, or the situation will get better. But at the moment, it seems to be getting worse rather than better, I would say.
All right, thank you, Phil, for that update. Now let's hear from our friends in the Netherlands at Vormen. Specifically, we're going to hear from Webbe van Bakel about what they're seeing in continental Europe and at the at the ports, specifically in Rotterdam where Voorman is located, but Webbe can give us an update on what he's seeing from all those big European ports. So Webbe, let's hear from you.
We live in interesting times, so they say, and being here in the port of Rotterdam, which is the largest port in Europe, and we as proud Dutch always say the biggest port in the world, competing of course with the Asian ports. Yeah, we also have our problems here. At the moment, not that much with so much the equipment, because we still are able to get containers outbound here in the Netherlands. But for us, one of the bigger problems is getting containers from Asia to Europe. So that's a big challenge. And what we see a lot to corporate customers as well is the rising cost of that. So we are now have to call clients where we literally have to say, sorry, dear client, but your shipment has an additional cost of $10,000 because of the fact the prices went through the roof basically in the last couple of weeks. Yeah, so we've seen some pushback indeed on that. So there are corporate clients with fixed contracts on rates for freight. There's always some variables in that, but there are contracts in place where kind of fixed rates are in place. And there's lots of discussion ongoing at the moment around fixed rates, because what is an additional cost and how can that be supplemented to the traditional freight cost? So that is at the moment quite a debate going on between both coordinators at our side and corporate customers, if that's the case. Luckily for us, we've been able, let's say, to educate the customer side over the course of the last years that, let's say, freight is an independent component which you have to separate from the moving cost. So we're a firm believer of fixing cost at the origin and the destination, but really keeping the freight portion completely open and transparent, because there's lots of variables in that domain. So we literally got one on my desk this Friday, a big US corporate, and they indeed are requesting us to pull down rates which are valid for the whole of the year 2021, even going into 2022, where there are no fixed contract rates anymore. Yeah, so I think in total, I think it's good to cooperate, to educate each other, and to really listen to the individual need, because they can be very well tailored solutions these days. So one of the things I see happening a lot at the moment is that we also keep shipments on hold at the moment in the Asia Pacific area, because there is no big need of getting these shipments out quickly, let's say, to Europe, because the family is not in need of housing at the moment, or anyway, they have to wait for certain procedures. So it's very much timing it right. And I think very, very important is that we want to, let's see, initiations early. So the moment we have bookings coming in and have confirmed move dates, the sooner in the process that's available, the sooner we can start reserving capacity. So I think that's another one. But I think that's really working together between corporate HR and the mobility department with the coordinators from either the relocation management company or the service companies. So I think it's something we have collectively to work on.
Thanks, Webbe. Okay, back to the United States, to our friends at Grable. Ron Dunlap, let us hear what you're seeing from the RMC perspective at Grable.
Sure, certainly freight rates have gone up dramatically, and I think as those costs are becoming more prevalent and people are more aware of them, they're looking at the strategy around how to move talent. So 2019, we may have paid $1,300 on average per container. Right now, we're paying close to $5,000. So when you start looking at just that cost alone, we see clients really starting to ask questions about where do we find our talent? And that's certainly something that is a topic at every review we do right now with our clients. Yeah, we're certainly seeing a struggle there. So if you think about more lump sums becoming international movers, and they look at the rates that they're having to charge to get their household goods over, we see them taking a lot less in regards to what they move over. So they're taking very minimal amounts of household goods over, which again, that impacts the household goods industry with smaller shipment sizes, smaller revenue. That certainly everyone pays the price, but the reality is if you're given a $10,000 or $15,000 lump sum and the cost of the container has gone up 500%, you can't do what you were doing before. So A lot of folks are leaving more goods behind, selling a lot of their goods, buying new goods when they get to the new location. So we are seeing a shift in the behavior at what I would call the consumer or lump sum level. Yeah, I think the one thing that COVID, certainly the pandemic, did for everybody, it's in some ways made people get frustrated easier, but in some ways also understand things that they may not understand. So when we talk about trying to clear customs and all the things that go involved in that are part of that, it really, I think, allows the individual to understand that things just aren't normal anymore. So even though they understand it, that doesn't mean there's not a level of frustration, because clearly if they're paying for any kind of quote unquote temp living, that tends to be a much higher cost structure. And again, they're looking for how can we help get things moved out quickly. I have to admit, our partners across the globe have been phenomenal working with the customs agents to really push things out. And there's one example. We had an individual going into Mexico, and it took 11 trips to work with the customs agent to get all the documentation done exactly the way he wanted it before we could get the individual's household goods released. But it's not an easy thing right now. Certainly, it's probably the biggest dissatisfier of anyone moving internationally at this point. It's certainly difficult. All we can do is educate the buyer. And one of the things we're finding is that as procurement continues to become more involved in every RFP we're tied to, there's definitely an education process that goes into explaining household goods, freight rates, everything that makes up that door-to-door cost. And when you talk about fluctuating costs, it's really hard when you're trying to price a contract. Now, for most RFPs, for global mobility RFPs, they won't necessarily get into a hard rate for household goods, for international household goods. But the reality is, once we get that win or we get that new client on board, it's really hard to explain why are the household good rates going up compared to their previous provider. So again, it goes back to education. And that's really, again, where our partners are key, because they're giving us a lot of the local information that we may not have as an RMC that we can share with our clients or prospects to let them know this is an area where there's great increase. And I think back a few years ago when the tax laws changed in the US and all of a sudden you had a taxability component to the household goods, there was a big effort around educating not only the procurement folks, but also the mobility team members that really let them know, hey, there's going to be a really large increase in costs associated with this. And that's where the education component was critical. And we got through that. We'll get through this, but it really comes back to being able to use your data, your analytics to really show what those costs are going to project out as. And it's hard. No one would have said, in a year ago that we would have 500% increase in rates, and that's where we sit today. So it's difficult to really explain it for sure. Well, we've always believed that at Grable, certainly, that you have to have complete transparency in everything you're doing around your rates and what are you charging and every fee, whether it's our fees, whether it's the supply chain fees, whatever that is. So I think the best way to do that is certainly be very transparent about what you're charging your client, but more importantly, finding industry best practices and industry data that supports those charges. And again, we've talked a lot about freight rates going up. The reality is if you can show them through some kind of third-party data source what those rates are doing, that tends to calm them down. But it really boils back to how transparent are you with all of your pricing. And that's been the secret, I think, for us, is to be very transparent and really allow folks to see exactly what charges are coming in and from where. And that's allowing them to look at it and say, okay, you're not really just charging me more money, it's truly what the rates are. So again, it comes back to transparency.
Thank you, Ron, for that update. We appreciate hearing from our friends at Grable. Now I want to kick it back for our final contributor, Brian Vickers from Pace LLP. Brian is our external government affairs person, and him and I, for numerous years, we've been working together to advocate on behalf of the global moving industry with the U.S. Federal Maritime Commission. Specifically, we've been looking for relief connected to port demurrage and detention at U.S. ports, and how when, for instance, a corporate transferee moves their shipment through a U.S. port, they are more likely, just because of the nature of household goods, to be selected for an examination or an inspection. And the International Association of Movers has been working through Brian Vickers with a coalition of partners here in the DC area to advocate for our transferees in those situations. So the FMC has taken some action recently with respect to the ports to try and facilitate the movement of shipments both into and out of ports. And Brian's going to give us a quick update on what he's seeing most recently on what the FMC is doing. Brian, give us an update there.
IAM is very engaged on issues of detention and demurrage at the nation's ports. We know that our members and their customers and supply chains have experienced significant delays and associated costs with both detention and demurrage that has been exacerbated by the onset of the COVID shipping chains, which have increased and caused additional congestion at the ports. IAM's discussions with the Federal Maritime Commission and congressional staff go back 3 years on this issue, so this is not a new area for investigation. IAM has met over the past month and a half with 7 congressional offices on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and will be reaching out to the Senate Commerce Committee with jurisdiction over the port and these charges being assessed. As a result of our efforts, along with other stakeholders, in October of 2020, the Federal Maritime Commission issued a final interpretive rule on detention and demurrage, requesting that the carriers only assess these charges to incent the movement of cargo. Clearly, these delays are not tied to the incent the movement of cargo, but instead have been assessed while our members and their companies are either returning containers or trying to get containers off the docks and onto the trucks. IAM has asked congressional offices to reach out to the Federal Maritime Commission to act further upon the interpretive rule and to set firm parameters around the detention and demurrage charges and when they can be placed. We will continue these efforts going into the second half of 2021 and throughout the remainder of the first quarter until we see a proposed rule come out. If you have questions, please contact IAM and we will assist you with any needs that you may have regarding the charges and our next steps and progress as it is made.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Really appreciate your feedback on what's happening on US's Capitol Hill and with the regulatory agencies here in the United States that oversee and govern the shipping industry and the ports. We want to ensure that all of our members are well versed on this topic. You need to be able to take this information back to your customers to help them to understand the problems that you are facing in transportation and the full global supply chain. We hope that this has been educational for you. We hope that this has maybe even raised some questions for you that IAM will be able to answer, and we need to band together to be able to find solutions to these problems so that we can alleviate the headaches that they're causing for your organization. So if you have any questions, if you have any issues, feel free to raise them to IAM so that we together can move forward to solve all of these problems. Thank you for listening.